It's Saturday, July 27th, 2024, and we are in the Flats in downtown Cleveland at the newly renovated Music Box Supper Club, where we'll be videotaping a presentation today about Cleveland radio legend Mad Daddy, starting in about an hour and a half. It's a beautiful day here in Big C. About 75 degrees, sunny skies. Got some things going on today on the river. Great view. And we even have radio's best friend here all the way from Detroit, Michigan. And this is the before. Let's see who's here waiting in the wings. Got Mike Olszewski.
Yes.
Radio's best friend, Art Volo.
He's some pest that goes around with a camera.
Jim LaBarbara.
And we're trying to have him arrested. But it's not working so far. That's all right.
Yeah, I'm not recording, don't worry.
WWGO in Erie, Pennsylvania. It was like that number 2 rocker. Jet was the big owned station. They owned the market. And I got a call from Jerry Spin. And Spin said, would you like to come in and work at Wixie? Now, I just need somebody to fill in. I can't promise you a job, but I want to hear what you sound like. Can you come in and do the night show? And I said, well, yeah, I would love to. But I'm working here. So I was doing the afternoon drive show, 2 to 7, production till 8. But then for like 4 or 5 months, they were looking for a midday guy. So I did actually 10 to 1 and 1 hour of lunch. So I said, I could come in and do the all-night show. So I came into Wixie and did the all-night show. Bobby Magic was bumped up to do the early night show. So I did that first show, and then that night Ray Otis took over at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And Ray was very, very nice, but Bobby Magic had somebody to see, some girl to see or something. So Bobby said, well, here's the log, here's the board. No, that's all you got to do. So I didn't know what I was doing. You know, they had these jingles where you talk over in the middle,
right,
where you could do something. But I had no idea. So Bobby leaves, and the next night I did it. Ray Otis was still the morning man, and then Ray Otis the next day. So my third day. Now I'm dead tired now because I'm doing all this radio because they told me in Erie. They said if you take a job in Cleveland, because he knew I was up for something. He said, I'll fire you. You're out of here.
Don't come back. Yeah.
So I didn't want to. I changed my mind. I didn't want to say anything to him anymore. So that third night, Howie Lund was in doing a morning show. And that's when I met Howie Lund, rhyming everything, doing everything, rhyming everything. So I left there, and Ray Otis had left, when he quit, he left a note or something that was really, he was really upset with Norman. He was upset with Norman Wayne. So that was it. So that was my little stay there. And then I wrecked my car, and I called Jerry Spin. I said, I can't come in. I said, but I'll be ready to work for the weekend. He said, forget it. And he screamed and yelled at me on the phone and slammed the phone on me. But I had those tapes from Wixie as I taped the first night.
Okay.
So I took the tapes. Steve Popovich came in. He was working for Mercury Records, local promotion. He came in, and I was doing music at Go Radio in Erie. And I said, took him aside. I said, boy, don't tell anybody. Did you hear me on Wixie? He said, no, I didn't hear you. I said, I was on Wixie. And he said, you know what, Jim Gallant isn't happy at KY. And I think there might be an opening at KY. You ought to call, there's no program director, you ought to call Bob Martin. So Bob Martin was the general manager. So I called Bob Martin, and Martin said, can you come in? And I took a day off from work, came in with my tapes, and I sat with Bob Martin. And Martin played my tape, listened to my tape, and he said, can you do more of this? Do you do more of this, what you're doing? I said, yeah, that's what I do, And he said, okay, and we talked for a good while. And then, like 2 days later, I get a phone call at Go Radio. I just got off the air. And he said, this is NBC in Cleveland. This is Bob Martin. We want to hire you to work for. And I said, yeah. And I hung up the phone because there was a guy named Johnny Holiday, not the Johnny Holiday, another Johnny Holiday working at Jet. who I replaced him at Go Radio. And I knew he was doing little shenanigans. So the second time, Bob Martin called me back, look, Jim, you and I talked yesterday. If you hang up on me, I'm not going to call you back. So that was it, and then I was started like 3-4 days later on KY. I got my first paycheck, because now what I was doing was summer replacement, but it was build up. And then they wanted me to do the music, because they lost their music director. So I did that for about a year and a half doing the music. And I was floating around. So I would do the morning show, did the evening show, did all the different shows. And I got the first night on the air, he happened to be with me, Bob Martin, and I said, listen, what a great opportunity for J. Bentley Starr. And he said, J. Bentley Starr, he said, we hired Jim LaBarbara. We didn't hire J. Bentley Starr. You're on NBC, you don't have to be fooling anybody. You're Jimmy LaBarbara. And I was getting ready to go on the air. And I had never been, I was Jimmy Holiday, I was J. Bentley Starr, but I was never Jim LaBarbara. I was always under these, personas, different personas. So that was a terrifying night for me, going to a new radio station. We were engineered, of course. KY was engineered, had a producer and everything. And that was I had to write my name down, so I wouldn't forget my name. But that was interesting. Then one more thing, I got my first paycheck. So I got my paycheck, and I went in to see Bob Martin. I said, Mr. Martin, I think you made a mistake. I said, my paycheck, and I said, here's what I got. And I started to say to him, I want to be paid by the week and not by the month. And he said, Jim, I'm so sorry. He said, yeah, we made a big mistake. And he said, you get $100 a week extra for talent fee, whether you do any talent fee or not. That's your talent base on top of your salary. And I literally started to cry. He said, didn't we ever discuss money? And I said, no. I said, the only thing I said was I got a raise from 80 to 90 at the Go Radio, and I was going to make $100 by the next year. I was going to 100. I said, so that was it. So that was my shock, my big shock, and that was a wonderful experience at KY.
Wonderful.
And then when they fired everybody at KY, everybody but the morning team, Charlie and Harrigan, and I think they knew they were having problems. So we were all gone. Jay Lawrence, Chuck Dan, Jack had left shortly before that. Jack left and went to Boston, and it's kind of crazy because Max Richmond had called me from MEX in Boston, and Max said, would you like to come up here and do the early night show in Boston, MEX, and that's where Charlie Tuna went, as Charlie had passed through town. He had gone up there. Lou Jack was there at one time.
Wow.
So a big rock station. So I said, yeah, I'd be very, very interested. He said, well, I'll be calling you back. So he called me. So I called Jerry G, because Jerry had worked with him at the Washington, D.C. station that Max Richmond owned. And he said to me, Jerry G said to me, Jimmy, sell used cars. Don't go to Boston. Do not go to MEX. He said, you'll be out of business. Don't go. So I said, okay. I said, but I would like to really move up here. He said, no, don't go. So he called me back the next day, and I said, what about the plane fare? You pay half and I'll pay half. So that was a good tip-off about Boston. I said, but you know what? Jack Armstrong is coming over later tonight with his girlfriend. I said, he's out of work. I said, oh yeah, that'd be great. So I put him in touch with Jack, and then Jack took the job, and I don't think Jack ever forgot me for that. They never gave me, I apologized to him over and over again, and then Jack left and went to Chum in Toronto and left the country. That's how he got out of that.
Very good.
That's my quick little story.
Thank you. And you're still on the air in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I'm still doing, I do 2 to 7 in the afternoon on WDJO. Right. And we have 2 FM signals and an AM signal, and then we stream on iHeart. So it's fun. We play 50s, 60s, 70s, and a little touch of 80s. So yeah, I've been doing that. And then on Saturday morning, I go on WLW for a half hour with Gary Jeff Walker, and we do four songs, and I tell a little story about it, a little backstory about it. Yeah, so I'm still doing that.
Well, you are the music professor. If there ever was one.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much, Jim. Jim LaBarbara.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got some people here as we approach the 2 o'clock hour when the presentation will begin. About 15 minutes until showtime.
Hi everybody. Hey, thank you so much for coming out. This is a great turnout, and we really are very excited to have the presentation for you here today. My name's Mike Olszewski. Thank you all for coming out, and somewhere he's cackling away in some other far-off land, the land of Oobla-Dee. We're talking about Mad Daddy, of course. So thank you for coming out and honoring Mad Daddy. Now, before we introduce Jim LaBarbara and Miriam Linna, I'd like to ask Jim Gagan, where is he? Jim? Can you come on? Jim, come on up here. Jim Gagan from the Cleveland Association of Broadcasters. Please support the CAB. They do great work, and they've been doing a great job with preserving the memory of so many broadcasters and looking in the future as well. Jim, this is for you.
Thank you, Mike. Cleveland Association of Broadcasters is an entity that is with broadcasters in the business, and they're responsible for keeping the excellence in broadcasting as we move forward in the future. One of the spin-offs, the one I'm a part of, is the President's Council. We were the past presidents. If you remember the Muppet Show, those three old guys up in the balcony, that's us. We sit up there and gripe about what's going on today. But the other thing we do is we preserve the legacy of Cleveland broadcasting, and there are two initiatives we do with that. One is with our annual event, Awards of Excellence. We have a President's Award, which we recognize somebody from the past broadcasting that we've forgotten about and need to recognize, and we do a bio and a presentation of the award for that. The second initiative we do is every month on the Cleveland Association of Broadcasters website, we have a legacy posting, and we do a bio about people from our past that have been pioneers in broadcasting in Cleveland. And so every month it's on the Facebook page too. It's cabcleveland.com is the website. And what we're going to do is we're going to recognize moving forward in the next few months some of the people that we're hearing here today with Jim and Johnny and Mad Daddy. We'll be writing about with Mike's help. And one of the things we do with Mike has become the historian for the CAB. And he's always reminding us of people over the years that we may have forgotten. And we probably have like a 10-page document with a couple of paragraphs about 100 people in broadcasting, and we like, okay, Mike, we need to recognize some of these people, and so we worked really close with Mike in the past, so we appreciate that. And in fact, Mike was recipient of the President's Award in 2020, which was given to him in 2021 because something happened in 2020. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Please support CAB because this is too important a part of our lives to just actually just kind of disregard. The funny thing is I teach college and I'll tell my students, pop culture is like tap water. You turn it on, it's there tomorrow and you think it's always going to be there. That's not always the case. And so many of these people played such an important part of our lives. Now there are two people that are missing here today. One of them is Mike Miller. Mike is the visionary who runs Music Box, and he's the guy that came up with the storytellers. And I think this might be the first time he's not here, but he had to run to Chicago for a very close friend of his, and he's actually doing a very special occasion with this guy. I mean, he's just ran in and out. The other person is Johnny Holiday, and unfortunately Johnny called me up. He was looking forward to being here, and unfortunately he had some extremely disappointing news. He had some urgent business he had to take care of. Trust me, Mike Miller is working to get him here as hard as he can. But at any rate, and also Johnny gave me some bad news. A true Cleveland legend, Carl Maduri, passed away. So if you remember Carl Maduri, keep him in your thoughts because he was a truly remarkable man, both with the record industry and obviously with the radio industry as well. Great guy. Also, I wanted to mention, we're here to talk about radio. And, quite honestly, a lot of people just look at radio and say, what's that? Especially, let's face it, young people. But there's still some great radio out there. And I just want to mention these people. Where's Ray Carr? Ray Carr, WCSB, does a great show. He's a historian in his own right and a longtime supporter of the pop culture scene. Cindy, for everyone who's with him as well. I want to mention Steve Train. Is Steve here? I don't see Steve. Oh, there's Steve. Of course, Steve. My apologies. Steve's Folk Radio on WRUW. Steve also did a tremendous book about Macabre. Please look for that book. It's really great. Kevin Deininger. And Neil with a name that I can't pronounce, but Neil there. But anyway, Neil there, they do Dare Waves on WRUW. And you know what, Neil, you gave me a beer glass years ago, a WRUW, that I still use to this day, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day. Sometimes more during the football season. My wife wants to talk to you, by the way. Also, where's Ray King? There's Ray King.
Right there.
Ray King is here from WJCU.
Read it.
And Wixie Online. And a guy that earned this title over the years, over 45 years. Art Volo is here. He's radio's best friend. Art is a historian who has gone from city to city taping people, and he's just done such a remarkable job, and it's an honor to have you all here. Also, there's some other radio that I want you to keep in mind, too. Rex Doan on WFMU. He's got a great show, and it's called Fool's Paradise with Rex, and he's been keeping the memory of Mad Daddy alive as well as that era. And let's not forget Kogar, the Swinging Ape. That's his name. Kogar the Swinging Ape. He has a show called Kogar's Jungle Juice. Now, mind you, for all the folks that we mentioned, all their shows are archived. I strongly encourage you to go to all of their websites, and if you need any more information, contact me. I'm glad to direct you there. Let's just talk, and Jay Hunt is supposed to be here too. Jay is from Toronto. He's a Mad Daddy historian. And Jay could not make it at last minute. He had to call in sick, but at any rate, Jay is doing his own research. He's doing a great job at it. In a nutshell, let's talk about Mad Daddy. Does anybody here remember Mad Daddy? I don't believe you. You're all too young. No, quite honestly, the guy that told me about Pete Mad Daddy Myers, it wasn't until 1985. He's to blame, Larry Collins. That's the guy. Put your hand up there, Larry. It was in 1985. I was at WERE, and I did a sort of like a little short synopsis of some of the famous disc jockeys in Cleveland. And Larry, why a guy that young would listen to WERE, I don't know. But he called up and he said, "You forgot about the Mad Daddy." Mad who? He sent me a tape that was just truly remarkable. I was hooked ever since. And it turned into a master's degree, a book, and Larry's to blame. So there you go. So I suggest that if you do have a book afterwards you want it signed, get Larry to sign it too. Let's talk about some of the people that are here with us today. First of all, a person who was a pop culture phenomenon. Now I'm talking about Miriam Linna. I knew Miriam as far back as 1971, if you can believe this. And believe it or not, I knew her name, I knew about her work, only because she was so much into pop culture. And I used to listen to WNCR. Anybody remember that station? See, now Miriam actually won a contest, a Pink Floyd contest, by describing her dreams. She did quite well there. She's also the president of Norton Records. She's the original drummer for the Cramps. I think you were also with the A-Bones and the Liars. There you go. To show you what she's done, Bob Dylan mentioned her on his Sirius XM show. So she's done some stuff. She's a champion of unsung musical heroes, an author, a lecturer, a publisher, a historian, a radio host on Kicksville Radio, and look that up, that's archived. Well, let's welcome Miriam Linna. Miriam, come on up here. Oh, you got it. Also, the guy that earned this title many times over, the music professor. He's best known probably here in Cleveland for WKYC and Wixie, but he got this acquaintance in Cincinnati. His name is Bill Randall, if anybody knows who Bill Randall is. Dr. Bill Randall. Well, he guided him through a master's program at the University of Cincinnati, and Jim LaBarbara is with us today. He's still on the air in Cincinnati. Jim, come on up here. And by the way, Miriam and Jim are both authors, and they do have stuff at the merchandise table. Please, I really encourage you to, if you've not read Jim's book, it's one of the best about radio I've ever heard. And Miriam, you've got a bunch of books. You didn't bring them today, but you do have some stuff from the Cramps. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we had a production meeting with Mike Miller, a couple of them, and Mike said, "There's one thing I want to tell you. These are radio people, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, tell them to eat the mic." So we have to have the mic real close.
No.
Please have a seat.
Don't distort it.
Don't distort it.
No.
Well, hey, his house, his rules. All right, guys, have a seat here. Now, here's the way we're going to do this, folks. If you have a question, I'm looking at the age of this audience, about my age. Put up your hand right away, because you're not going to remember it. I'm not going to remember to call on you. So put up your hand right away. Hey, well, let me ask you, Miriam, I'm going to put you on the spot. Why are we still talking about Mad Daddy? I mean, what was it? What made him so unique?
What was it?
Oh, Mike, get the mic from.
Hello.
There you go.
Oh, why are we still talking about the Mad Daddy?
Yeah.
Well, the Mad Daddy is blasting constantly in every home that I ever go into. People want to be listening to him. He had a patter and a sensibility that nobody else really had. He just kept on going and going and going. He's never been replicated, imitated, or anything else. Love him to pieces. I think he's great. Shall I go on?
Well, you know what? Well, let me just give it a little nutshell, too, about Mad Daddy, which I should have done beforehand. Pete Myers, born in California, wanted to be an actor. In fact, after World War II, he was in Japan, and he actually did sort of a War of the Worlds type of thing on Japanese radio. And one of the people that did not appreciate that was General Douglas MacArthur. So he was decommissioned from that troop. He was at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. He actually played before Princess Margaret. Wanted to get into acting, couldn't do it. Was just getting bit parts. So his brother decided he was, his brother Ernie was in actually radio, and he said, this seems like a pretty good profession. But he thought, if I could come up with a character and take it to New York, I'm going to have it made. He made it all the way to Akron and started the Mad Daddy. He was reading Mad Magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland. There was also R&B music, race records as they call it back then, which was a specific lure for young people, especially in racist post-war America. He got to New York after a tumultuous time in Cleveland. In fact, at one point, he wanted to fill Lake Erie with Jell-O. They wouldn't allow it. He did jump out of a plane as Mad Daddy, and he became infamous. He went to New York for one night as Mad Daddy, and they said, that's the stupidest act we've ever heard. We hired lovable, laughable Pete Myers. Well, he was up there for about 10 years. And he got this call to come back to Cleveland, the Cleveland Arena, for a show that this gentleman was at. He co-hosted it. Jim LaBarbara. What do you remember about that show, Jim?
Well, I tell you, now here's the poster. I've had it hanging in my bar, my game room at home with my jukeboxes. And it was Norm Knight put this thing together. This was May the 5th, 1958 at the Cleveland Arena. And special guest Joe Finan from Wixie, Jim LaBarbara, me from WIXY, and Ken Hawkins from WJMO, and Dick Libertor, WZAK, and a special guest, surprise guest. And that surprise guest was the man that we're talking about tonight. Now, I want to mention that the stars were Chuck Berry, Fats Domino. Now, Fats didn't make the show. Fats somehow missed the airplane and didn't make it to the show, but came to the after party. And I got to tell you, he's walking around the after party and nobody's talking to him and he doesn't know why. He missed the thing. And Fats Domino was the guy who always had to have a couple of drinks, even if we went on the bandstand show, to have a little libation to get him loose. Well, he didn't show up. So on the stage, they introduced the disc jockeys. There's re-MC the acts. And Pete Myers, as Mad Daddy, came out and got the biggest, he got a Chuck Berry kind of intro from the audience. They loved him, absolutely loved him. And it was interesting, if I can tell a little bit of story now.
Please do.
All right, so backstage, I didn't know who Pete Myers was, but I did the all-night show at that time on Wixie. And our morning guy was Joe Finan. And so I said to Joe backstage, I said, what's the story on this guy? And he said, oh, he's a good guy. He's a really good guy. I didn't know anything about Mad Daddy at all until I read your book. Now, backstage, and then at the after party, he kept asking Joe Finan, are you happy? Are you happy in Cleveland? Are you happy in Cleveland? And Joe said, yeah, I'm back to Cleveland. You know, I said, my friends are here, my family's here. Yeah, I love it back in Cleveland. Yeah, and he asked him at least 3-4 times. Because we kind of joked about Joe and I and said, are you happy in Cleveland? And this guy looked great. Good looking guy, kind of a Princeton haircut, clean cut haircut, striped tie. He looked like a preppy guy from one of the Ivy League schools. And a great, great voice, wonderful voice. That's what I remember. And then that party that night. And him talking about, are you happy in Cleveland? And now to tell you about Joe Finan. Joe Finan, and he and I were talking about this. He was exiled from Cleveland. He was busted for payola. He was real big in Cleveland. You probably remember, a lot of you, Bill Randall and Joe Finan, they were at the top of the heap after Unfree. Owned the market. And Joe was busted for payola, exiled. In fact, I remember one story, he was telling me, I guess, one of the record companies put a driveway in. And the guy, because Joe could be nasty. That guy was drilling, sledgehammering his driveway, getting that damn driveway out. So Joe and I, he never talked about Pete Myers, Mad Daddy, so I didn't know that at all. But here's Joe coming back to Cleveland. Wixie hires him, and he's a huge star. Joe Finan at that time owned Cleveland. So that's when Pete Myers met Joe, and all the stories that Joe talking about. He owned Cleveland. So about 5 months later, I'm on the all-night show on Wixie, and a liner came off the wire, and it said, former Cleveland disc jockey, WNEW personality, Pete Myers died by suicide. And I read that on the radio on Wixie. This is like probably 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. My hotline goes, it's Norman Wayne, the owner of Wixie 1260. And Norman said, would you repeat that to me? And I said, yeah, I read the story to him. And I could tell he was literally breaking up. I don't know if he was crying, but he was breaking up. He was very moved by that. And he talked on the phone with me for about 3 or 4 records, so I knew he was really emotional about that. So, fast forward a little bit, and I go to, incidentally, there's really an interesting story here, because here is Joe Finan talking to Pete Myers, and Pete being very, very depressed about, I guess that's when he went back to New York and was thinking about Mad Daddy, if I could only Cleveland. I should have stayed in Cleveland. I didn't need to be, in New York. And all this thing with finding, 9 months later, 11 months later, because in April, he left to go to Denver, and Mike Ranieri came in. So that's the irony, I think, in that story. Now, I'm in Cincinnati working. I did the afternoon show on WLW for a number of years, and we got a new midday guy. His name was Chuck Doherty. We called him Chucky from Kentucky. He had been, when I was a kid growing up in Pittsburgh, he was a morning man on KQV for a while, went to Philadelphia, became a big star in Philadelphia, and got a job in New York. And when we hired him, I was talking about his resume. I said, Philadelphia. I said, but you were WNEW, because those were my dream stations. He said, yeah. I said, looks like you didn't stay there very long. What happened? He said, well, I got there and they put me on the 1 to 4 show. He said, Croninger was a friend of mine, a big boss at the radio station, WNEW. He said, and there was a guy, a nice guy. I met him, talked to him a little bit. He's a very nice guy, but he committed suicide. He killed himself, blew his brains out with a shotgun. He said, and that was it. I couldn't stay. So I left. I left and went back to Philadelphia. He said I was too involved in it. And that was, so there's my connection in several levels with Pete Myers.
You know what, I'd like to point something out too, that when Larry Collins introduced me to Mad Daddy, years later I went for a master's degree and I did a biography of Mad Daddy. And my co-author and researcher, Janice, is over there. And this is a conversation that happened on the way up. I said, well, it should be great today. And Janice says, yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing Miriam and Jim. And I said, there's 3 people on that stage. She said, I stand by what I say. Anyway, I get this all the time. At any rate, what happened was, when I was doing the master's thesis, luckily, I was still able to get hold of some people who were still with us. Neil McIntyre as producer, and Ernie Myers, who was Pete's brother. And Ernie was in kind of bad shape. He had Parkinson's disease. He had a couple of strokes, but he wanted to talk. He brought up an important point. He said, Pete was never the same after Cleveland. He said when he came back from Cleveland, he just knew there was something different. And he didn't realize it was going to come to that point. But Miriam, I want to ask you something about your time. Obviously, Eric Perkeiser, who, if you remember Lux Interior of the Cramps, anybody ever remember the Cramps? Of course you do. Yes, the original drummer. Did you ever talk to him about Mad Daddy?
No, I never spoke with him about Mad Daddy.
Is that right?
That's right. And what people have to remember is that I was in the group the first year. So the first year of planning and the first year of the group, he never spoke about Mad Daddy.
Except, didn't you do that as a demo, Mad Daddy, the song Mad Daddy?
No, I
really?
did not.
Okay, strike that from the record.
Yeah, remove that. No, I didn't. And as I was telling someone earlier, where I learned about Mad Daddy was from a girl that I went to high school with. Her name was Shar Rao.
Oh, okay.
And she was the daughter of a mortician. And after my departure from the Cramps, she became their first manager.
Okay.
And I honestly believe that a lot of those conversations that happened between Lux and Shar developed into this kind of a passion for Mad Daddy. And
sure.
Shar was the person who really spearheaded all of those tapes being brought together. She really was the one who worked for years to get all of that stuff together when there was really nothing going on by anybody else. And she came to us in 2003 and said, hey, listen, I've done all of this stuff, put all these things together. Do you think anybody cares? And I said, we care.
Yeah, right.
And we ended up doing all the ear checks on that were available at that time, which were a lot, 50 on Norton.
I should bring this up that Miriam is the president of Norton Records, and she put out that wonderful collection of Mad Daddy stuff that I think it's all sold out. It's a collector's item now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but when I brought the company to Cleveland for a short period of time, that was the 50th anniversary of Mad Daddy's death.
Okay.
And so we did a commemorative EP. I have about probably 15 of them left, and we do have them here. It's on purple vinyl, and it was done in tribute to him, although it was dated for his passing.
Well, I would jump on that. The interesting point is that Rex Doan on WFMU had an interview that he aired with Lux Interior and Poison Ivy Rorschach, the guitarist from the Cramps. And Eric lived in Stowe, Eric Perkeiser, and he would call up Mad Daddy. And he said that he would call him up, and finally, Mad Daddy said, who is this guy that's calling? Where are you calling from? And he said, Stowe. And he said, that's long distance. And he paid for his phone calls. So it was, he lucked out in that because back then, you did pay, I can just see Eric Perkeiser telling his mom, okay, well that $15, which was big money back then, it was for an important cause. Mad Daddy, who? At any rate, still, when he came back, he was not the same after Cleveland, and you saw that firsthand, that somehow he was affected by that.
Yeah, apparently he was, to go back and do that. That amazed me. And I reading your book and going back over and saying, WNEW became my dream station when I was at WLW. WNEW was the pinnacle of all adult standard stations in the country. So he's married to a beautiful young girl. This guy's still like 40 years old, good-looking guy, has a sports car, lives at a prime address in New York, and goes back, and the story that I had heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, was that he dressed up, and once I heard somebody say a tuxedo or fine clothes, went into the bathroom after it was demoted to the night shift, if you want to call it a demotion, because as I understand, he got the same salary, and he went in and listened to Mad Daddy tapes, and took a classic shotgun, and blew his brains out. And I can't understand that, because he was on a prime station with William B. Williams.
Sure.
And he's great talent. It was the #1 station in that format in the country.
Oddly enough, when I was speaking to his brother Ernie, he said that Pete had this obsession with the Eastern culture, Japanese culture. And without actually saying it, he sort of suggested that he was almost Harry Carey. He just thought, this is as far as I'm going to go, the honorable thing is just to end it. Now, something that's interesting about Cleveland is that, and there's a strange little twist in this, he would come on the air as lovable, laughable Pete Myers. Then he'd go out, and then he would come back as this gothic beatnik, as Mad Daddy. And for a while on WJW, for about a month, he was actually doing a movie on WJW. And at one point, he suggested, I was talking to an old timer from Channel 8, and he said, yeah, he wanted us to hang an 800-pound camera from the ceiling so it would look like he was upside down. And they said, we're not doing that. So then he hung upside down, and he said, blood's rushing to his head, this is not the medium for me. Now what's interesting is, the guy that took over for him in between was Ernie Anderson. He was his newsman. Now, it's funny because when Ghoulardi first came on the scene, Ernie Anderson didn't want to do that. He had a voiceover career. He said, "What? I'm going to do this?" He said, "They said it's an extra $50 a week." He said, "I'll do it." So, at any rate, he came. If you remember the early days of Goulart, he had like an accent. And finally, just said, "The heck with this. This is not right." But the funny thing was, I was out in Los Angeles, and I was doing an interview with Ernie, and I thought I would impress him. And I said, I know that you used to be on for Pete Myers when he went out for dinner, went out for a bite to eat. He looked at me, he said, "Do you really think he ate his dinner?" And he went like this. And I said, "Okay, I'm not going into that." But at any rate, still, you had this remarkable talent. And, just the way things, if he would have stayed in Cleveland, he probably would have taken over the Ghoulardi spot. So, that's, it's sad just the way it went. Still, when we talk about this guy now, and we look back, you can't help but see the talent from the tapes and things like that. He did a thing called Zoomerating. Miriam, you've heard of Zoomerating. It's on your CD, where he does the alphabet. He did backwards, frontwards, and all that sort of thing. And he would come up with a new word, supposedly, every time. His producer, Neil McIntyre, said he never heard him say the same words twice, which I think is impossible.
He had a great language all of his own. And like you said before, he had training in acting.
Yeah.
And when he brought that to the radio, you didn't really need to be seeing anything. Although you did. You could go to the dances and he was this horror host,
Yeah.
with that totally appealed to the kids. I mean, the thing that I believe about him is that he was able to have that audience for the year and a half that he really was in this area. He was able to have that audience, and if you looked at the demographic, I know it's not written down. They didn't really measure those things, did they, in those days? But it was young. That it was a young demographic, and those people may have grown out of it. By the time that he was in New York, it was a kind of a different deal going on. Mm-hmm. And I think we were talking about the fact that there was other personality DJs, lots of them, lots of black DJs that had the great patter and the crazy talk and all of this stuff. And also with the horror end of things, there were other hosts like that. But with him, he had the younger audience and then trying to transition into something that that went on with when more of the beat stuff happened, whether it's like the Beatles and their songs and stuff, and then into hippie era and stuff like that. He didn't cut it. Wolfman Jack did. He cut it all the way through. Didn't have a horror personality, but he did have a personality of the Wolfman.
Well, let me ask both of you about this, because in post-war America, we were looking for something to unite us, and nothing unites people like fear. And all of a sudden, if you got this character who's teaching your kids a completely different language, dresses up in a cape, cackles like a madman, do you think people felt like a danger in that? Was that part of the allure? Plus R&B records. Those records, these kids are going to be dancing.
Could be. I mean, obviously it was, but it was the same thing with Alan Freed, wasn't it? In a way, listening to that music and acting in that way and combining the forces and so on. It was radio has been such a force, and as we were talking before, it's the audio portion of it that has your imagination going wild, and you've got the time to think about it, whether you're the parent worried about your kid or whether you're the kid getting all kinds of great ideas.
Well, I think he got a bad deal. He goes to New York, and they put him on WNEW with William B. Williams and Ted Brown. This is an adult standard station.
Oh, yeah.
William B. gave Sinatra the label, the chairman of the board, and they're putting this thing on at night. So you're an adult, in your 50s or 40s or whatever, and you're listening to this. It's a teen show. He should have been on the rock station in the first place for the act that he was doing. But if you listen to it, very, very innovative and ahead of the time. But that's Cleveland. Cleveland was doing that. You had Alan Freed doing this playing the race records, and the great Bill Randall breaking records that nobody in the country was breaking. He was the one playing the Southern Kid from Sun Records with Elvis Presley's records for the first time north of the border. So this was really a breakout market that was duplicated in other markets. Pittsburgh, we had a guy named Porky Chadwick, who played on the radio, the Planet Pushing Papa, and there were guys like that around the country. But his act was so unique, and listening to tapes that he did, because he had the sound effects, all the things he was doing. You talk about theater of the mind with the picture that he was painting, and with the music, the black music that wasn't being accepted by. If I was a kid growing up in Cleveland at that time, I would have been listening to him, because I would have been one of the cool kids, one of the hip kids listening to him. Now, whether that translated to adults or not doesn't matter, because everybody was aiming for the demo at that time. When we were on WLW and Wixie at the same time, I worked at KYC here, we were programming special music for women, because the women were the housewives. That 10 to 2 hour, that was for the women. You would play the softer music, the Bobby Vinton music, and then that would change. Same way at Wixie.
Women hate that music.
Yeah, but that time, that's what we were doing. There was selective programming with even the pop records.
Sure.
So he was at a time slot that was wrong in New York. But the one thing about his talent, I just want to say this, that he leaves, he goes to Wins, you mentioned Neil McIntyre, he goes over to another station, leaves the #1 station in New York, WNEW, and goes to Wins, and he gets let go there. WNEW, prime time opens, and they hire him back. They had the choice of any guy, believe me, the kind of money they were paying, any guy in the country. And they took, why would they take him back? Pete Myers, he was that talented. So as a performer, radio performer, I just heard tapes from both and later in life, but he was sensational.
Yeah.
And his legacy should be what he grounded on opening those doors, just as the parameters in radio actually said Cleveland. Cleveland is where things happen. With a guy, with Bill Randall, we presented a thing at the Billboard convention in 1977. Randall didn't go through the guys he was supposed to get through, talking about radio can be. And he played Gary D tapes. And Gary D was stretching this parameter, with Gary D talking about some truck driver calling, I don't know if you want to talk about, we can get you, this is a black guy I know in such and such a street, we can get you a hubcap, there's no problem about that. And thank you for calling, all you guys homosexual truck drivers.
Sure.
So that's in there, and then a black lady calls and she's all upset about something, and he says, well, that's just natural because of who you are. And the Magnificent Montague was there. Now at that point, Magnificent Montague was a black jock, one of the best ever in Chicago. At that point, he's a big executive at Motown Records. And the Magnificent Montague was sitting on the piano just a couple of chairs over from me. And he got up and his entourage of about 20 people walked out. And Randall was like, but he pushed the parameters. And it soon happened. And Gary D happened with Howard Stern and all that in New York. So that's what he was doing. He was pushing parameters. And then you later had guys coming in. Ron Britton in this city. Ron Britton was here. guys doing other things. And then Fast Talking, I was a guest on Magic when Wixie Reunion and Scott Howard doing that rhyming stuff, rhyming stuff. And of course, Wixie, yeah, he would have had a job if he wanted to come back, because Norman Wayne, Wild Child, we got the Wild Child, I think we got him out of a mental institution, to be honest with you. I think so, because he was a big jock in Chicago, had beaten Dick Biondi, and he was working on a little Wimshot station, and had some problems, and they brought him in. He couldn't ride a car, he rode his bicycle at work. And the child was, if you ever heard Dick Kemp, the Wild Child was sensational. And then the kid came in, Jack Armstrong, with Fast Talking, and that's the same thing he did. So yeah, there's a door that was open that he did. Whether he lived to see it or not, and guys, whether you heard his tapes or not, that to me is part of that legacy.
The funny thing about the Wild Child, we were doing a book about Wixie years ago, and we tracked down Dick Kemp in Ketchikan, Alaska, and he was living above a bar. So I got the name of the bar, and I called up the bar, and I said, "Is it true that Dick Kemp is there?" He says, "Yeah, he comes every night. He'll call you back if he thinks it's important. He won't call you back." I said, "Okay, don't even bother." Yeah. But really, it's funny because there was a legacy among many of these disc jockeys, but you could not equal Mad Daddy. I mean, he was in that tier by himself there. You know, if anybody has any questions, now is the time to ask as well. But we're just kind of curious, was he on a station with too many superstars on WNEW? You had William B. Williams, Ted Donald.
Yeah, you got the great lineup there, but I don't think that would, I don't know how that would play into it, you know, because he was still top dollar. He's married to a young lady, a beautiful model in New York. He's got everything going for him. I don't think that was the reason. I think the demotion and shift probably had something to do with it. And I think you were right with this, that night, that one night, Are You Happy in Cleveland? I think really going back to that.
Sure, sure. Miriam, you live in New York right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, the change in radio has, you know, I mean, is the one thing about New York is that they hang on to tradition.
Yeah.
Has there been that same change up there? I mean,
We still have Cousin Brucey.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. You still have cousins.
There's a loyalty, and I think that's the thing with disc jockeys in general and radio people is there's a loyalty, the public and the person who is being remembered and constantly followed. So that's part of the whole magic of Mad Daddy and so many of the jocks is that
Sure.
people really remember the good times and remain loyal.
You know, it's funny you brought up Cousin Brucey because I spoke to him a couple weeks ago. Brucey's 90 years old. You would not know this. You know, really, he's just full of energy. And we were talking to him about, I was talking to him about Mad Daddy. He says, here's the advice I would have given him. Number one, stick to one identity. You got two identities, that's not going to work. Number two, don't come into New York thinking you're going to have what you said, loyalty, because he said the audiences were loyal. And I think maybe that was it. Maybe he was, maybe he anticipated too much. Maybe he wanted too much. Maybe he just aimed too high. Because his brother told me, or Ernie told me, he said everything he wanted was in Cleveland, and he realized that the superstardom he wanted, you know, everything he wanted was here, and he didn't realize it at the time. So, but this was a different radio market back then too.
Yeah, when he was on a different station in New York, if he would have been on the right station,
Oh, true.
I think that would have taken. And then kids developed this. Like Porky, I mentioned Porky when I was a kid growing up in Pittsburgh. He was a rimshot station, but it was cool to listen to Porky playing records by Frankie Lyman. A lot of the main stations weren't, you know, the Otis Williams and the Charms and these King records that were coming out. You know, but that's what he was doing. He was playing stuff that you weren't supposed to be playing. And he pushing those little parameters that mom and dad, they don't understand, but we do. We got this little thing.
You know, first of all, hats off to Norton Records too, because you did a remarkable job, Miriam, you and your staff, finding the stuff on Mad Daddy, because when Jan and I were doing research, he left a very little as far as the digital footprint. Photos were very difficult to find, and the air checks and stuff like that, because we had a tape recorder in the 50s. I mean, that had to be tough for you.
The thing that you have to remember with collectors and with a label like ours that is focused really on digging up as much information and as many recordings. It's always a joy to find something, even if it's a scrappy demo of something.
Oh, yeah.
Is that it takes a village, and it really took a lot of people. Everybody was so giving with what they were able to find and locate. That it made the job a pleasure for Sharp, basically, in putting so much stuff together. And there continues to be more tapes. I seem to have landed with a couple more today.
Yeah.
So let's do the transfers on that and find out what's on them.
Well, by all means, sure. Let's preserve as much of that as we can. You know, one of the things that Janice and I, when we were looking for photos and things like that, which is very difficult, we found one that was never published, but they were pretty creepy. It was a sequence of him biting this woman's neck. And even today, you know,
That's creepy.
wait until you see the photos. Buy the book. See the book. But I mean, it's pretty strange. It's just the way she's, you know, and the look on his face and everything. The funny thing was, though, he did become a different person. And I spoke to various people that have worked with him over the years, and they said, here's the thing. Pete Myers did not become Mad Daddy. Mad Daddy became Pete Myers. That he was like that in real life. And we spoke to some people that were actually his roommates in Akron, and they said he would come home with the cape on, you know, from the station in Akron at midnight. And they would say, a guy walking around the streets of Akron with a cape, and they said, hey, it's Akron, you know. What do you expect? But I mean, he lived this Mad Daddy. And the funniest thing was, too, this is another thing. When we were talking to one of the guys, Travis Rodebush, he said, yeah, I remember Pete Myers. I remember him taking out the garbage every day. He liked the grape. The funny thing is, nobody ever saw him drunk. If he drank, he disguised it very well. So, questions, anybody? Okay, we don't want to step on anybody's toes. Let me ask you this, Jim, when you were, you know, it was a different kind of radio back then. Could he have survived? I mean, beyond...
I think he would have been, you know, the wild child with our station at Wixie with Norman Wayne, because Norman was looking for something different to beat. I was a KY, and Wixie knocked KY back to good music, playing good music. And HK and Wixie took over with this little 1260, knocking CKLW. We had 5 stations playing the same music. And Norman Wayne's genius as a promotion man was just incredible. I think, yeah, that would have happened. And then, you know, you were talking about the Cape. We had a guy with the Cape, Lou King Kirby. The King Kirby did the afternoon show. Good-looking guy, and the King of Night. This is your king, and I still keep in touch with him. He's living down in Cancun. It's a little mansion down there. And he calls sometimes and said, this is your king. But he drove around in a big Cadillac limousine with a big king thing on the side of the car. And he had a little girl that worked, I think she was Marge Bush's daughter, I think. She had a little hot pants outfit on with the mesh stockings, a little, you know, they're looking like the 60s, like Sonny and Cher kind of outfit, looking hip. And she would open the door, and the king would go Government Square a couple times a week, and they would open the door, radio blasting, and the king would step out with his cape and his big crown and wave to people and get back in the car and come back to the station. So we did have that kind of thing. And that was Norman Wayne's, you know.
Bring it back.
And Lou King Kirby, he played that.
And talk about the change in radio, like around 1970, 71, like that. Would he have done better on FM? Miriam, what do you think?
Well, gee, I don't know. I just wanted to, you know, you brought up that fact that we actually connected over something that happened in '71. I mean, that just to go back to it, it's not a Mad Daddy incident, but it could have been.
Sure.
Is that WNCR? It was NCR, wasn't it?
Yeah, WNCR.
So NCR was having this contest, send in your wildest dream, and I was a wild dreamer, so I sent in a crazy dream.
Let me point out, this was for the Pink Floyd catalog.
Yeah, this is okay, 1971.
Yeah.
Right. So I ended up winning this contest, and they read my address over the air. And say, you know, any 15-year-old girl, they read the address over the air, and I went and picked it up. But in your book, when I found out that you knew about this, and that you actually had the recording, and you were kind enough to make a copy of the recording for me, that blew my mind, is that it was the innovation of radio, and that was an innovative thing to be able to do like a dream contest like this, and then read the dream over a track of the group that was coming in and was about to be interviewed by very young disc jockeys.
Sure.
You know, I forget if it was Billy Bass or whoever you know was doing the interview with Pink Floyd at the time. But it was innovative, and innovation is always the thing. You do something, you do a trek. You know, and people are listening in, and they want to be surprised. They don't want the same mundane stuff.
You know, you brought up a good point about formatting too, because on FM back then, they couldn't sell any commercials. You know, so you could play, you know, long, you know, album sides, things like that. And I mean, the jocks used to do that. They put on a whole album side. I think I'll go outside for a ham sandwich or something like that. You know, whatever bathroom songs used to call. But AM was a lot more tightly formatted because that was the big moneymaker. Do you think that might have helped back?
You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking back to that because I left Wixie to go to WLW in Cincinnati in probably May of '69. And Billy Bass took my job, and he was doing one of the FM stations. It wasn't MMS yet, but he was big. You know, because he ran a record store somewhere.
Sure.
That's how I knew Billy.
Oh, music rock,
Yeah, he was hip. He knew all the records. And my girlfriend Susan would say, "We could go see Billy. We could buy some records," because he knew everybody. And Billy came in and took my job on the all-night show, and then eventually left and went back to MMS then.
Sure.
And then was the boss there. Would Billy have? I wish Billy were here. Would he have hired him for the night show? Because you think about that then. As a matter of fact, the music was being played on FM, on whatever MMS before MMS. I did a show, Norman Wayne had me do a show on Sunday night. Doc Nemo actually started, I think, called Red, White, and Blues. So on Sunday night from like 9 o'clock till 2, I would play Jimi Hendrix, and my closing song was, I think Mind Excursion was my opening song. And then the end song was the Star Spangled Banner with Jose Feliciano. So we were playing FM on AM just one night a week. Key, cool sounding, that. Whether that would have worked or not, I think it would have. I think he would have absolutely blown away because
really
of what he did. And he was smart enough with his language and the way he did everything. He could have made it work. He would have made. You know what? He was smart enough. Yeah, I think he would have adapted to it. He would have made it work.
Yeah. And there was one guy who we're still in touch with, and he's out in California now. But one guy who really kind of looked at him and said, "Yeah, this guy, Mad Daddy, was an inspiration." Does anybody remember Doc Nemo? Okay, Doc Nemo, of course, Steve Nemeth. Steve's greatest hit was not so much on radio, but it was in the films. If anybody ever saw the movie RoboCop, RoboCop 1, RoboCop 3, he's the guy that says, "I'll buy that for $1." He's being asked to come to these, various, these pop culture conventions to sign photos for one line, and he's getting $35 a pop.
Wait, is that Doc Nemo?
That was Doc Nemo, yes.
I'm working at Wixie. We were broadcasting when I came to Wixie from the tower in Parma, from the tower. Because Joe Finding would get drunk and got arrested by the cops in Parma one time. Got a front page story in the paper. And I got in trouble with Norman Wayne. Norman Wayne gets me in trouble. They call me in because I got the child drunk. There was a bar at the top of the hill, and they had a trivia book. And we played trivia after the meeting, whatever day of the week it was. And we'd sit around and drink all day. And he got drunk. And he wrecked his bicycle coming down the hill. And he was like a grown adult man, and I'm like 23, 24, and they're blaming me for getting the child drunk. But that was fascinating. Yeah.
Well, back then too, maybe he was that, which brings up the question: was Pete Myers a man out of his time? I mean, he was good for the 50s, and obviously, if you're thinking about emerging counterculture and something that's going to scare your parents, I'm going with Mad Daddy.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, Cousin Brucey brought this up. He says that act got old.
I don't know about that.
And then, and I mean, in New York, you had Zachary and people like that, but he said that act got old. And once the British invasion hit and stuff like that, and they really kind of, in Cleveland, the R&B records were not getting the kind of play they were during the day that they did at night. You have to wonder if, maybe he was just a man out of his time, because it was great. There was greater acceptance of a lot of that act, later on, I think.
I'm sorry, one thing I was saying, Doc Nemo. So the first time I met Doc Nemo was, we're broadcasting from the tower, and there's a guy climbing through the window, which was right next to the studio, and he's climbing, he's saying, hey, I'm Doc, he introduced himself, and he had some pills for me. He had a whole big range of pills. He said, I'm turning Cleveland on, and I want you to be a part of it. That was my first time meeting Doc Nemo.
Wow.
Daddy never did that. Well, I'm wondering though, I mean, we talk about a man out of his time. I mean, the emerging counterculture was looking for something to make themselves unique. Who was more unique than Mad Daddy? I just wonder if, maybe if that would have continued, if he should have changed, maybe he was just too extreme.
Well, I think that I'm using the word psychoanalyze, the psycho bit, kind of fits Mad Daddy. But it's hard to psychoanalyze anyone. People the fans want to say, they didn't let him be Mad Daddy. That's why he checked out. That's why he killed himself in the most violent kind of way. But there had to be other things going on, like you said. That he was married, the job thing. There's all kinds of things that could make a person crack, and that's exactly what happened with him. It's not necessarily that, and it was changing times. I don't think he could have been the monster man as he was then with the bibbidi boo all the way to the very end.
At the same time, he could have been like Goulardi.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Really. So once again, the change in scenery didn't help. Jim Rowling's over here, and he has a question. Yes, Jim. Oh, union engineers, yeah, sure, yeah. Jim brings up a good point. Back in the 50s and 60s, and this was in New York, maybe even today, those are union jobs. And I mean, I was at ABC once, and I put down a can of pop on top of a machine, and the guy said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Don't touch that." He says, "We have to have an engineer take that off." I mean, that's how tight the engineering was. Did you have that at Wixie as well?
No, not at Wixie. Well, we had it at KY. KY was strictly, we were engineering and produced and everything. If I did a commercial, there would be the engineer, a producer, and that. And then on my show, when I did the all-night show at KY, there were three different producers I could have in a night. There were engineers that would put the records on. And then when I got to WLW in Cincinnati, we had the engineers, which really confused me because I didn't know what we had the guy we called the judge. He'd sit in one room, two rooms over from where I was, sleeping every night. So I didn't know. And then the chief engineer calls me one day and said, "You know, some guys want to take care of you in the alley. You go to get your car. You're doing something upsetting our guys." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you put a tape on." Because I think Paul Revere called one night and I put a tape on to record it. And I didn't know he's supposed to put the tape on and stop the tape. And I didn't tell him. I said, "I'm so sorry." So we had that for a while.
That's an interesting point, though, because, and Jim brings up a good point. If you had to be the engineer for Mad Daddy, and you had to do all these sound effects and spin and all that sort of thing, and Mad Daddy had sound effects on acetates, okay? These were homemade records, basically, that quite honestly were not meant to be played a whole lot. But Kogar the Swinging Ape came into those, the original sound effects. This would have to drive an engineer nuts if all of a sudden you see this guy, and from all accounts, he wore the cape in the studio because he'd have to go out and talk to the people afterwards. That would have to make them crazy because how are you going to take instructions from this guy? He's like, leading this insane orchestra.
Now, did he have his own, if anybody knows if he had his own engineer, because Phil Music, they call him Phil Music, on the Jerry G show. So Phil Music always worked Jerry G show.
Yeah.
And he took him with him. When he went to Chicago, he took him with him. Because he put the drops in, knew how to put the drops in. A real art to know the guys. In radio, there's a timing thing. And
Well,
had
he
the timing
did have
down.
two engineers. One was Arnie Rosenberg, who,
Excellent guy.
great guy. And then Paul DeFrancisco, who was also at KYW for a time, WKYC. And both of those guys were, pretty hardline union guys. What's kind of interesting, too, is that when I was speaking to Neil McIntyre, he said, he was as close as anybody to Pete Mad Daddy Myers. But he said, and Johnny Holiday said the same thing. Any conversation they had was never more than 5 minutes. He was very pleasant. They don't remember what it was about. It was all just small talk. And Neil McIntyre said that he used to accompany him on his gigs, and sometimes he'd have 2 or 3 gigs a night. I mean, he'd do an Armory here, and then he's off to Akron to do a dance and something like that, making appearances. They had 3 hours between appearances, and he said they sat in a bar. He said over those 3 hours, he can't remember what they talked about. He said it was just things like, "Wow, these pretzels are salty. She shouldn't be wearing that type of a top," things like that. Now, one thing, though, that I did understand is his newsman at WHK, the news director told them, "We have to start with a crime every time. We have to get people's attention." So they were talking about juvenile delinquents back then. And Mad Daddy hears this, and he rushes in, he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, we're told to lead with, juvenile delinquents." He said, "That's my core audience." He said, and as he put it, they're the salt of the earth. He said, that Switchblade crowd is the salt of the earth. And quite honestly, they would come to the station at night to see him, and he would come out with the cape and all that sort of a thing, and put on a show. But still, I mean, it's just amazing that he was drawing on a certain audience there. And once again, I don't want to say fear, but it's just, he knew the audience. He knew that the audience wanted something different. And he reached out and grabbed, and he was able to do it very successfully. So, but how does marketing come into this, I have to wonder? Do you think you could have been marketed differently?
Yeah, the question that I had for both of you guys that just came to mind was advertising. Like, did the advertisers whose products were being touted by Mad Daddy approve of the fact, like Gillette Blue Blades? Wow!
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and Jim, I'll let you answer that as well. But here's something that's kind of interesting. Alan Freed and Pete Myers had a common link. It was Leo Mintz at Record Rendezvous. Now, Leo Mintz knew recordings, he knew the audience, and he had pretty deep pockets. And as the story goes, that he supposedly told Pete Myers, "I've heard your show on WJW." And he says, "Well, you have a lot of friends." He says, "I got a lot of money. That's all my friends." He said, "You're my friend. You sell my records." He says, "You could be a better friend on WHK to get a bigger audience." So right there, he said, "What do you mean?" He says, I'll get you in at HK." Well, unfortunately, WJW also had a non-compete for what I think it was 3 months. And they said, you can't be on TV or radio for 3 months. Mind you, he could have done quite well just doing dances and things like that until WHK, but still, he took that extra step, jumping into Lake Erie from the plane, you know, his Mad Daddy, all those sort of things. I have to wonder though, you saw very little advertising, as we were mentioning, or marketing about Mad Daddy. He was his own marketing person.
Yeah, no, but I meant about the advertisements that were on the program.
Oh, I see, sure,
You know,
like,
like
Gillette
Moldy
Booth.
Basement and stuff like
Grange
that. I mean,
Jewelers.
is that really going to encourage anybody to hire this company to get rid of their Mama Moldy days?
You know, I mean, you were a voice as well, Jim. You were an advertising voice.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying. I don't remember hearing the commercials on his
Yeah.
show. That now that you brought that up, because if you have a jewelry
He
store,
did them himself, yeah, so.
and
Yeah, the jewelry store, the
Yeah.
going steady ring.
you have to be a specific audience
batty
that you're
bucks.
going after. I can
Yeah, the
imagine
batty
he blew some people off, you know. But again, I don't know. But he had a unique. Then he did a good job with commercials that I heard. When he would do a commercial, he sold the commercial. So
Oh, yeah.
it would depend on the advertiser. And was there somebody else in that time slot that they had? All of a sudden, no, I don't want that. You know, I don't want to be paying for that.
You know what was also kind of interesting too is that there was a crossover audience. When Jan and I were doing the research on this, and we did like Cashbox and Billboard and Plain Dealer, the Press, things like that. There wasn't a whole lot written about Mad Daddy, but the Call and Post really did a lot about him. And they had young teenagers talking about him and talking about the Batty Bucks and things like that. So you had primarily, a newspaper with a primarily black audience in a lot of ways, talking about this white disc jockey. And, it's kind of interesting, too, is that there was that crossover there, which, once again, after World War II, this was a completely, people talk about it being conservative nowadays. Oh, if you were a white Protestant male back in the 1950s, the world was open to you. After that, you're on your own. And he appealed to people saying, look, there's a lot more than just this sort of like white bread type of entertainment, things like that. Another thing, too, is TV. I think TV helped him in that he was not on TV. That, parents were staying home watching TV, and I'm not going to sit around my parents watching Red Skelton. And all of a sudden, after World War II, kids had money, they had part-time jobs. It was a different emerging culture, because up until World War II, you grew up like your parents. You were miniature versions of your parents. So, as a result, after World War II, people are starting to have their own music, their own entertainment, and the birth of the disc jockey. So, TV probably helped Pete Myers in that he was not on it.
Yeah, and when you talk about the race records, there was that time period where, and it wasn't the disc jockey, it was the radio station owners who were really the bigots. The kids wanted to hear the original records, and here you're playing Tutti Frutti by Pat Boone.
Sure.
And the guy in Cincinnati, my good friend, I got my master's degree when he came to the University of Cincinnati. Matter of fact, we had an engineer at KYC, and I did an intro for Bobby Darin's song and did my little rap that I did about Bobby Darin, some historical thing about Bobby. And he said, man, you sound like Bill Randall. And I said, man, I would love to meet Bill Randall. He said, Randall wouldn't give you the time of the day. I was his engineer for years over at WRE. And then he came to Cincinnati, and then we became good friends. I taught a couple of Vedic clerks for him, and he paid for my master's degree and became very close friends. But Randall saw that niche. He loved it like Robert Johnson. He loved the blues. He worked in the jazz clubs in Detroit. He loved the originals. But what he did was, he had the four lads, he had the four. He was the guy, the diamonds, the crew cuts. He got the guys that come in, gave them crew cuts, and did Shaboom that was done
Johnny
by the
Ray,
chords.
of course,
Yeah, and Johnny Ray. Before that, in the chords version, he put it by the crew cuts. The white version sold like crazy on the radio. The Gladiolas, Maurice Williams and the Gladiolas, and Little Darlin'. Well, he took and recorded that with the diamonds, got them, put them in the studio, told them how to do it, became a giant multi-million selling record.
Sure.
Did that with numerous songs. And it got to the point where people like Laverne Baker doing Tweedly Dee was trying to sue Georgia Gibbs because everything, if she coughed, Georgia Gibbs was copying that and took it to court and didn't win. So that was a tough thing to do. But black records were constantly being covered by white artists like the Pat Boones and that. And then finally the teenagers, these kids who were listening to Mad Daddy and Alan Freed, the jockeys like Porky Chadwick, then they demanded, these kids in that time demanded, I want to hear Little Richard. I want to hear Fats Domino. I don't want to hear, and that's how that all turned about, because of the teenagers of the day demanding to hear it.
There was a famous story. Little Richard did an interview, and they said, how did you come up with some of these songs? He said, I wrote Wop Bopaluma Wop Bam Boom because Pat Boone wouldn't be able to say it. He was wrong. And he also said Pat Boone made him all kinds of money. You know, this is something that, it's kind of interesting because I was talking to somebody when we were doing the research. I said, how do you think Pete Myers should be remembered? And they said, why should he be remembered? Well, wait a minute, he was such an interviewer, of course he's going to be remembered. He was just so different. How do you think we should remember him? Will he be remembered, and how do we keep him, his legacy alive? I'm going to put you on the spot there, Miriam. You're doing it already with the CD, too.
Well, when Andre Williams was alive, Andre remembered him as being the guy who went and put Greasy Chicken on the radio, and he's remembered in our circles, and the circles are, you know, causing their own little circles.
Sure.
With understanding that there's people like this that were renegade people who had an idea and an energy and a desire to play great records. I've heard Mad Daddy shows where he's playing really lame, tame music. That was not his music. He was being told to play that stuff. You can't tell me otherwise. You would shatter my whole concept because I want to think that he was playing the wild stuff, the gritty stuff, the dirty stuff, the jailbait, you know, any lineup from Fortune Records, that's for sure.
Sure.
And giving the time of day to small labels, and that's what caused all of the commotion with all the different people that we all know and love with wanting to get unique records. It happened also in, as you know, and the holy city of Pittsburgh, with all of those jocks there,
Sure.
Whether it's Mad Mike or Bob Mack or Bob Laborio or Porky Chedwick or whatnot. It was those DJs who are to be revered and remembered because the jocks and radio are what made rock and roll, and they still make rock and roll to so many people who happen to enjoy their greasy chicken hot.
And let's remind the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame of that about disc jockeys as well, you know, because I think there's only 4 or 5 that are in there. And
What?
that's it.
Really?
Yeah. Well, there's Tom Donahue, of course, with FM. There's Alan Freed. And then you have Rufus Thomas, and then you've got Sly Stone, but they're not in for being disc jockey. B.B. King, same thing.
I'll tell you what, there are a lot of artists that
Let's get on
talk
that.
about this on the radio in Cincinnati that absolutely makes me ill. Three Dog Night has had 12 #1 hits, and they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Let's go back to the beginning with Jerry Wexler at Atlantic Records, who made the pitch for Three Dog Night. They were going to go with them, and then they went with a little company out in California. That's where it happened.
Sure.
The kid who was the head of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cincinnati for some legacy award. I was there for it that night. And Otis Williams has had Ivory Tower, Hearts of Stone, with a group called The Charms, The Roots of Rock and Roll. Ivory Tower with him, Hearts of Stone, and a whole bunch of other songs on King Records in Cincinnati. And Otis calls me one day and says, I'm going to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I was so excited. So Stevens was the guy's name, Stevens from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So we're backstage at this event, and I said to him, I said, Terry, thank you so much. I said, Otis Williams really deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, Otis told me, and he was going to be there later that night. He said, no, I invited him to perform at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's an enormous difference. So, and I said, Otis was the one who also produced records. He did the Twist for Hank Ballard. Hank Ballard, he produced that record. Note for note, Chubby Checker, and I love Chubby. I talked to Chubby many times with Chubby, drove around with Chubby, hung with Chubby. I said, Chubby, you lifted it note for note. No, that's mine, you know, I said, Hank's in this room, pulled down in Florida. Hank said to me, he's listening to the radio, go all excited because they're playing the Twist. And the guy said, Chubby Checker. He said, well, no, blah, blah, blah. And the deal that went down there was, behind the scenes that went down was, Dick Clark, who had Chubby Checker, wanted to get that song, didn't want to play it by Hank, wanted to record it by somebody else. Tried Freddie Cannon, that didn't work. He tried the Dovells, that didn't work. And then he got this kid who was doing an imitation of everybody and got him in the studio to do it. And the deal was to King Records and to Hank, don't plug that, and I'll give you finger popping time. And then he did. In all fairness, he did give him finger popping time, and let's go. But if you look at the roots of rock and roll going back, I know you say Bobby Rydell, that's bubblegum. Bobby Rydell, look at the number of hit records Bobby Rydell had. Those people from that whole era, Chubby Checker, without a doubt Chubby should be in there. Connie Francis should be in there. Neil Sedaka should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's a whole bunch of people from that era who are ignored by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. How are you judging people? If you go by chart performance, they belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It bothers me because they kissed up to Dick Clark when he was alive. And then when he died, they said, all right, all these people associated with him, boom, they're done. Because that's what happened. Dick Clark made all these people. And the payola thing, am I getting off the wrong side?
No.
I did in my book, I did research on Dick Clark. Dick Clark owned Swan Records, he owned Jamie Records. So he played more in an 11-month period, more Dwayne Eddy records than he did Elvis Presley records in a period of 18 months. And the records, Freddie Cannon, I love Freddie, but those records, they all happened. He owned the record company. He owned the publishing houses. He owned a distribution house. He owned a pressing company. He owned everything. So when the payola thing came down, Dick Clark looked a clean-cut guy. Mom and Dad liked him. He was clean. He owned all of these things. Hell, he didn't. He was payola. He controlled everything. And every record he played, I'm working in Du Bois. Dick Clark's doing it on the bandstand. We got to play that record. That's the hit record. So he had control of all that. And so who do you get? Okay, Finding got it here. I don't know all the details where, but Alan Freed, his name appears on Chess Records. I was almost going to do a master's thesis on Alan Freed. Should be exonerated for all the stuff they tossed at him. They killed Alan Freed. And Alan Freed knew music. Dick Clark didn't know music. Dick Clark was just this guy that put on stage, and he was the pretty boy. Okay, he's out there doing it. Alan Freed knew the music. If you listen to Chuck Berry records, his name's on it. He didn't want it. Leonard Chess put his name on it, and he actually augmented the song "Pounding Go Chuck Go" on the record. So you can probably make a good case for that. But that's one of my pet peeves is Alan Freed. I never met him, but to me he's way up here in the top, and he ended up dying at a very young age, a pauper, and his son, Leonard Chess paid for his son to get a suit to go to his dad's funeral.
Wow. You know, folks, we have another event here tonight, so we're going to have to bring this to a close. Thank you all. I want to thank Miriam Linna. I want to thank Jim LaBarbara. And thank all of you for being here tonight. Please, Miriam's got some rare cramped stuff out there for you. Jim's got his book. We have our book. And please have them sign them all. And thank you all for being here. And please continue to support the Storytellers and the Music Box Theater. And thank you all.